welcome to Slideshow. I'm Dave Hayward and I'm the founder of Europa Creative Partners. It's my pleasure to introduce Mark Laurence, who's the founder of 10 Past Tomorrow. He's a AI strategist and trainer. And Mark, I'm really curious about how you got into AI in the first place. I mean, it's only been around a short amount of time, or certainly in the public consciousness. What got you into this crazy gig?
Yeah, it's one of those questions that probably only becomes apparent when you look backwards on things, really. I come from, like you, marketing world, agency world, specifically content marketing and running the strategy side of HubSpot agencies. And I think that's probably where the genesis happened. If I look backward, I didn't realize it at the time, but HubSpot is a phenomenal platform. I've got no affiliation with them financially. Phenomenal platform. And even kind of 10 years ago when I was in that space, the ability to create workflows and automations and, non-AI automations, but really powerful, practical and effective automation using software to save time for humans, to take away that kind of heavy, manual, repetitive, routine work and give space and time and bandwidth to focus on higher value tasks and more satisfying parts of people's jobs. I think if I track it all the way back, it was that, right? And then I actually left agency world around the time that we had our first child, because the two did not go hand in hand.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah. And so then went away and had a little bit of a like an introspection period and decided to retrain as a futurist, and did so through an organization called Institute for the Future, who are actually the premier futurism research and training organization. They're in Silicon Valley. I didn't go there, but I studied
zoomed in
online. And that was fascinating for a whole raft of reasons. The phone was not ringing off the hook for a futurist based at the bottom of the world in New Zealand. But as part of that training, we did look at was like future technologies and emerging technologies. And so saw the kind of emergence of the transformer and its first evolutions as like early GPT models and how terrible they were. But those first wrappers were things like Jasper and Writer gave the idea of where they were going. And I just put a bet on and said, well, the smartest minds in the world are betting their careers on this technology, and the biggest companies in the world are emptying their pockets to fund it. And so something's happening here. So I went all in and trained myself on it. And as I say, the phone was quiet, and until ChatGPT hit the ground, really, that was the change moment. And suddenly it made AI tangible for the world, and especially for businesses. And it went from being this weird esoteric concept to people being able to understand, well, I can actually engage with AI now and it can meaningfully change our business and our roles. And since then, it's been a different story. It's been quite busy.
And 10 Past Tomorrow, today, what do you do, and who's your sort of ideal customer? What does that look like?
So we're a small team of 3 of us. The mission is to spread AI literacy and skill sets as deeply and broadly as possible throughout New Zealand. And I think we're going to talk some more about AI literacy and skills. Predominantly focused on working with the SME community in New Zealand. I'm not set up to work with large enterprises. I also have a personal belief that large enterprises are on the back foot in terms of being able to respond to this technology. So the shorter answer is working with the New Zealand SME community to contextualize what is generative AI, build a really deep understanding, both AI literacy and practical skills, build the strategic understanding for senior leadership teams and boards, and through all of that, help to show, guide, strategize, and train how this technology is really in real time rewiring organizations right beneath our feet. So that's the mission, and that's what we do.
Oh, cool. Well, anyway, this is Slideshow, and the reason we're called Slideshow is because we get eminent guests like yourself to come on and bring some slideware for us to have a chat around. And I have happened to have had a preview of this, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you've got. So why don't we get into it?
Yeah, well, maybe the way to do it is to show people that we've actually got, if we want to, we've got about 25 slides.
Sweet.
But it's all kind of encapsulated with these first 2. And then the others are there just if we if we go down rabbit holes, so we can chase those rabbit holes, and hopefully I've got slides to talk to on those common rabbit holes that pop up. So this is kind of my thesis statement, is that this is where the world of AI is globally, but certainly very much so in New Zealand. In fact, if anything, you can kind of extrapolate and strengthen these trends and these numbers when you're looking at the New Zealand market. Gallup last year said that 47% of Gen Z employees are using generative AI weekly.
Wow.
But half of their schools or workplace are giving no clear guidance. I don't like to read everything that's on.
No, I was going to say that, the one of the issues here is that quite apart from no clear guidance, some of them is actually don't use it at all, which seems to me to be a very short-sighted it's understandable, but quite short-sighted view of the technology, because, on the one level, allowing students to explore topics and understanding without interruption is really valuable, and self-directed learning and all that sort of stuff. But on the other hand, this technology is here, and as soon as they go out into the workforce, there it is. Are you seeing any shift in that, or is this still still?
Yeah, look, that's exacerbated in the academic space, obviously.
Right.
And I actually work with a couple of New Zealand universities. I'm working with AUT and also with Waikato University. And interestingly, in both those cases, the schools that have come to me have been the business schools.
Right.
I think they're a little bit of a canary in the mine in this instance, because business school graduates, that is the inflection point between academia and industry, right? And so these business schools are seeing industry is demanding that our graduates are AI literate and skillful, because when they walk into the workplace, they're expected to be using the tools from day one, right? So so the short answer there is I am seeing higher education starting to move on this space meaningfully.
Nice. I think what's interesting also is the second statement you've got there, because you're essentially, which is a trend that's been well documented, which is that you've got this kind of breakup happening between personal productivity and collective productivity. You're having employees working through AI and enhancing their own personal productivity, but it's not sort of bleeding through to the organization for a number of reasons. And I have got a couple of questions around that. The first question I have for you is, it's obviously quite a lot coming from the top and the bottom as well, but it seems to me that's two areas that are probably worth looking at. One would be the skeptical board chair or the skeptical board about how AI literacy is essentially business critical. What do you find yourself saying to board chairs and executives at businesses who may be on the skeptical side of what this technology means?
It's not so much what I say to them. I think it's fundamentally how I've designed and had to evolve the whole structure of what we do at 10 past tomorrow.
Oh,
so
interesting.
If I can talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
The first couple of years of being in business, we would start our engagement with any new client by going in and offering what I call the tactical training. So how to use the tools to drive productivity and efficiency. And we'd start at the operational layer of an organization. So we'd train the operational staff. And most of the time that was my mistake. It was also the mistake of leadership, right? So most of the time I'd get a call from the CEO and say, hey, we need to do something about this AI stuff pretty early. Can you come in and train our staff? And then the CEO, he or she, and most of the time the senior leadership team would sit in the ivory tower, and I'd train the operational layers.
No way. And really? Interesting.
You'd hit this glass ceiling time and time again. It happened for the first couple of years, and it took me about that long to identify what was happening. And it's, if you have an AI literate and skillful operational layer, these tools are so powerful. They rewire what individuals are doing, but they also rewire that kind of your standard operating procedures and your informal standard operating procedures that kind of build an organization. And then you've got all your employees who are saying, well, why do we have to still do it that way when we can do it 15 times faster and more efficiently and better? But we're bumping up against this friction because the senior leadership team themselves are AI illiterate, and they're not building a culture of celebrating AI and promoting AI. In the last 12 months, 18 months, flip the script completely, and now insist that any first instance with a client have to be training the senior leadership team. And this is my statement of, it's not so much what I say to them, it's when they actually have this practical tactical training, how to use the tools, and they have these increased like tangible felt sensations of doing something that used to take them 2 weeks, and now they're now doing it in 45 minutes. When they feel that and they're actually AI fluent themselves, it's not a hypothetical jump anymore to how the technology is going to rewire their organization. It's a real felt sense of, well, now I can understand what it would be like if all of our staff had the skill set. So yeah, it's less what I say to them, it's training. It's the training, helping the senior leadership team become AI fluent and literate themselves, and then that opens up what I call the strategic and the cultural implications of AI.
I think there's also clearly a very powerful operational implication. Do you find that you come across operational teams who might be a bit resistant to AI transformation because they're not necessarily incentivized to change processes which should work reasonably well as they stand?
Yes. But again, that changes even with basic AI literacy and skill
Right.
sets. Once people, and this is why I distinguish between AI literacy and AI skills, because often that hesitancy or fear or anxiety, it's based as much on emotion as it is on technical anxiety. Those are questions like, well, what is AI going to do to our brain? Is this going to make me stupid? Is this going to make me lazy? Is this going to replace me? There's almost limitless questions that lead to those anxiety and fears. But once you address those as part of AI literacy, you reduce those fears and then you build the skills. And once people have the feeling of, oh man, I don't have to do those heavy, mundane parts of my role anymore. Once you combine those two together, people release, so.
It's true. I mean, I think it's incredibly valid to talk about those emotions because I think the speed of change has been so drastic. And, I work in marketing, obviously, and marketing is probably one of the disciplines, if not the discipline, most heavily impacted by AI. I'm sure legal's probably another one. There's, all sorts of, but basically any knowledge worker discipline is pretty heavily impacted at this point. And I think me and my colleagues and people that I know go through a range of emotions from outright terror to being extremely excited, as you say. And so do you think AI literacy, part of that is actually addressing that kind of that emotional response? It's almost like a change management thing more than anything else, about going through the valley of despair and all that kind of the Kruger-Dunning, the change management framework that they use about how change gets adopted.
Yes. Look, it very much is, that's a lived experience.
Yeah.
So, there's the emotional pushback. There's also and quite rightly, there's the ethical questions around how this technology has been built. Is it really here to serve everybody? What's the bias that's involved in these models? What are the data privacy considerations? All of those are the really valid concerns that start to manifest once you even scratch beneath the surface. And you're dealing with grown-ups, and certainly in my first forays into an organization, you're dealing with senior leadership. These people don't just own up to being fearful and anxious about the technology. They present it with a whole lot of storylines in front of it, right? And so for that, and for many, many reasons, you hit on the big thing, is I say AI is actually as much a cultural and leadership challenge as it is a tech challenge. The tech is actually, so intuitive, so easy to use. It's designed that we just use it like we're talking to a human being. It's not a tech challenge. But because it's so powerful and has such a rewiring of structures and processes, it is a cultural challenge.
We interviewed a couple of friends of the firm recently on Slideshow, Tim Sharp and Ed Ortega, and both of them in different ways talked about how AI transformation is quite radically different to digital transformation. In that the digital transformation, for want of a better word, was in its earliest form certainly really just replicating an analog process and turning it into a digital form, really. But it was recognizable to the process that it was replacing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with AI transformation, the whole workflow goes away sometimes, So it's actually it's a really different kind of transformation. Is that your experience, or are you finding that it's quite similar in ways to the sort of the previous transformation era?
No, that's absolutely my experience, and I'm a huge fan of Ed's and his contents and his philosophy as well. So I'm fully in alignment with him. And I think, so to go to the second slide, I'll just put this there and then we'll get to it. But, with a classical like digital transformation or software transformation, you go and you put a CRM or you put a piece of sales software into your organization. There's a known result of where you're going to get to, and so you can, as a change management process, you just you see what that end state is going to be, and then you reverse engineer what the steps are to get there. And largely, it's a pretty linear process. AI, as you say, it removes whole processes, it removes the need for whole skill sets. It adds requirements for completely different skill sets in an organization. You're looking at implications like there was a Harvard Business School study with Procter and Gamble a few months back, which showed really clearly that teams of one human plus AI were outperforming teams of 2 or 3 humans without AI. And so those kind of questions about, well, how does this rewire how we even look at what teamwork is and how we build our teams? There's no known end state to what happens once you start to infuse AI into an organization, because it actually it seeps into all the cracks of an organization and all the skills and all the people and all the processes. So you can't, it is requiring new paradigms for us to try and negotiate and build in terms of the cultural change management of this technology.
I think I sort of hadn't really thought about or articulated, I guess, and something that you just touched on right then, is that the technology is still very new and it's developing at such a rapid pace that actually the end state is, no one really knows what the end state's going to be. And in fact, exacerbated a bit, I think, by the fact that, AI is certainly the generative side of it is non-deterministic, which is quite different to what we had before. So, I imagine the sort of work that you do is complicated by that aspect of it, and that that really old adage of building the plane while you're flying it is kind of appropriate here, because you don't really know what the actual end state is going to be while you're undergoing the change, which is again quite different to digital transformation, where you were replicating known workflows with a similar workflow at the very least, right? It's probably more accurate, a bit faster and all that kind of stuff. But all the same, it was recognizable. Whereas now it's all change.
And also to acknowledge on there, like to use that building the plane as you're flying it analogy, The plane is obsolete every 7 months or so, because
totally.
You've got a whole new generation of turbine technology and whatever else builds the plane, so you have to acknowledge that as well. As like when you're looking at what a possible end state is, somehow it's asking us to try and factor in, well, what is exponential growth in this technology that we're only learning about? What does that possibly look like?
Exactly. I imagine there are lots of proof of concepts that were developed a bit too slowly, and by the time you've sort of got the proof of concept, actually the technology's moved on entirely. I think a good example of that probably is ChatGPT's AI agents, which they released last week, I think. And I wonder if, and this is something that Ed's written about recently, which is that, in some ways, the way that they're going about it is almost an interim type of technology, in that they create a browser because the internet isn't quite made for AI yet. It's made for humans. So they've actually created a pseudo-human interface for the AI to work on. But that's probably not going to be necessary in 18 months, 3 years, that sort of thing.
Yeah, which kind of harks back to there's always parallels, or there's often parallels drawn to the advent of the internet, right? And how, or actually when any general purpose technology is invented, we tend to try and use it to do things the way we used to do them, And when we got the internet, web pages were just basically digital representations of our printed flyers. It took a long time for us to actually understand the full opportunity available. And I think that's the same with what we're going through with this early stage of this technology.
So take us through the building blocks here. I'm interested actually what you think. Obviously, you need all of the legs of the stool for the stool to stand up. But is there anything in particular that you think is the highest impact of these 5?
Yeah, there are. Just to round off that conversation we had on how weird this technology is and why it doesn't map to traditional digital transformations or software installations and transformations. If you say company was looking at bringing in a new CRM or sales software, where they typically start is say, okay, well, let's do an impact assessment and understand how's this going to affect us internally, externally, our stakeholders, blah, blah, all of our touch points. Also, we need to have a plan for what this technology is going to do. So let's create a roadmap, 12, 24, 5-year roadmap, so that we can talk to the strategic implications and we can convince the board, etc. From there, you basically make your decision and install, and then you might go down to here, education and training, and probably this is a bit of an afterthought, and the document just sits in a bottom drawer, and there's probably none of this. Yeah. Whereas with AI, and to answer your question directly, this is the most important step, and this is what's being neglected. I think where we are in the current, the early stages of the AI era, and it's why you're seeing things like 91% of employees are using it, but only 13% of organizations have implemented multiple use cases. It's because AI education, AI literacy, AI training is not widespread enough that whole teams and whole departments and whole organizations can collaboratively understand how to use it to rewire an organization. And so let's say that you were trying to take that traditional approach, and I've seen a lot and read a lot of organizations who have. They go straight to this stage and they say, okay, well, we have to try and understand how is AI going to affect our staff, our teams, how's it going to affect our customers and our suppliers and our partners, and therefore let's make a roadmap. And you see these roadmaps and the impact assessments, they're being built and designed by people who actually can't use the tools themselves, and they therefore can't extrapolate and understand what the first order and second order and third order effects are. This is another thing that I'm hot on, is quite often the first touch point that an employee will get with generative AI is they'll be emailed the company's usage policy, right? And you hit on it. Not happening so much now, but even a year ago, some of those policies were just like,
don't touch it.
Brick wall, you're not allowed to touch it. And what I see is even the best of them, they've got a real intimidating feel to them. It's like, hey, and that is often the first cultural touch point they have as well, because the insinuation there is AI is dangerous. If you don't use it properly, there's some serious repercussions here and punishments, the worst of which you could lose your job. And again, these policies are being written by people who don't fundamentally often understand the full spectrum of benefits and risks and concerns. So what I find is you start here, firstly with the senior leadership team, and then you roll it out and make structured literacy and skills training available to everyone. And I really mean everyone, from the CE down to the interns. This is the fundamental building block that all of these others are built upon. What have you seen?
Is a 12 to 24 month roadmap realistic at this point?
Well, certainly not until. So what I coach is these first 3 happen in parallel. Like, this is not a
linear,
sequential.
Yeah.
ladder. The first three happen in parallel if you're doing them really well, and they tend to take about 12 months, 18 months. And then when you get to this stage, what you've got is an organization who they're all like starting to become power users of the technology, and they're AI literate and have started to address all of those kind of philosophical and ethical and responsible angles of the discussion that really terrify people. But they're using it. That's the main point. And it's starting to like rewire the tasks and processes and workflows. Usage policies are in place which are permissive rather than just heavy-handed.
Yep.
And you're starting to introduce a real culture of promoting and accepting and rewarding and incentivizing AI use. And at that stage, then when you've got a company that's got to there, you can start to do some impact assessments, and you can start to say, okay, well, now we're also getting into the space of what does bespoke AI look like? And you can start to do these steps, but as you say, very much with the asterisks over them to say, we acknowledge that this technology is making itself obsolete every 7 months. So these are loose roadmaps at best.
Yeah, it's trampling on Moore's law, isn't it? I mean, it's accelerating at such an incredible rate. And I wrote something recently actually about how you can really feel the pressure that is happening for those big companies like Meta and OpenAI, and that they're racing stuff out, sometimes not fully formed or fully developed, because the pressure to have releases of features and products is so intense. But what that's doing is it's creating this kind of fever pitch where most of us mere mortals are just getting to grips with the last technology, and then something else comes along.
It's hard enough for people like you and I who are full-time in this space and like really devoted to being the funnels for all of our clients. And that's why I've got a lot of sympathy and empathy for senior leaders and just for your knowledge workers, right? Because you're weighed down by day jobs, which are busy enough. How do you try and keep track of this like general purpose technology that's developing exponentially? It's a tough ask.
I think one of the things that strikes me is that for a non-technical user of AI, if you are going through that kind of change paradigm, you reach a level, because it's so intuitive, you can reach a level of expertise pretty quickly, especially with generative AI. But then you hit this kind of plateau where you sort of in this, where you probably need to start moving into the kind of automation and then into the agent space. Mm-hmm. But it's difficult to know when to actually kind of really engage with that stuff. Mm. And if you're a business leader of a really large company, that is part of, I guess, of the ongoing AI education, isn't it? It's not a one and done kind of scenario, I imagine.
Yeah. I'd preface that by saying I don't know many people who have hit the upper thresholds of even what can be done with just off-the-shelf tools. And I kind of
nice.
I include myself in that. I'm still, because there's this like first era of learning where you just think that these things are writing tools and doing tools. And then you start to be exposed to the fact that actually they're even more powerful when you consider them like a strategic analyst, a thinking guide, a professional coach, like a personal strategist for you. Yep. And so that opens up a whole new world. And then, from there, that starts to open up a whole new layer of being able to do things. And that kind of compounds. And then you find new tools, off-the-shelf tools, which open up a whole new section of your daily work and weekly work. So what I would say is actually for the, if people are listening here who are in the early stages of AI journey, don't be intimidated by the talk about agents and automation, and because firstly, there is blue sky to be explored about. You can fundamentally rewire your job and your career if you just become a power user of the off-the-shelf tools, right? Like ChatGPT and Google Gemini. Yep. And what I actually think is it's more like organizations hit that threshold probably quicker than individuals. And that's part of what I find part of what I think our role is within education and training, is to really get people to understand how far can we go with the off-the-shelf tools, the generalized, I also call them generalized platforms, Where's the frontier of their capabilities? Because when you realize what you can't do with those tools, that's when you start to, and you really understand what they can't do, because there's misconceptions there. That's when you understand, okay, now we might need some bespoke tools and platforms built for our company. So that's part of what I see as educating, so people know where the change of frontier is.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that frontier is shifting as I think being an AI startup must be one of the hardest jobs in the world, because you could easily wake up one morning and suddenly OpenAI has just wiped out your whole business model. Certainly I think if you're an AI note taker at the moment, you'd be a bit nervous, because it feels like, Gemini, and if I was at sort of like Fireflies or Fathom or any of these ones, I hope you're hitting the whiteboard and thinking about what the next kind of value prop is going to be, because these so much money is pouring into the big players that they're starting to eat up all the smaller ones a little bit. In a little bit similar to how Apple used to roll. Actually, there was sort of like, I used to be a big power user of Evernote. I don't know if you remember Evernote, but and then all of a sudden, Notes, the native app on Apple's things, just started getting really good, and I stopped using Evernote. And it's like, yeah, I think that must be one of the challenges being in that space right now.
Even some of the not even just your smaller startups, but a couple of days ago, and this will timestamp for people watching this episode in the future, but a couple of days ago, Gemini bought out Opal, which actually hasn't hit in New Zealand yet, but I'm watching a lot of demos, because like that puts players like Zapier and Make and N8N and those, they're not insignificant tech companies. That puts them in the firing line. So yeah, I forget what our original point is, but I would not want to be in the development space at the moment. Yes, you've got the potential to earn trillions if you're one of the lucky chosen few, but you've also more likely you're just going to be made obsolete.
I think the relevance for particularly for the your customers, for example, or the sort of people that I deal with on a regular basis, it probably comes in around 4 and 5, because what you're essentially you've got to map out the impact that the AI can have on your organization, and you've got to figure out roughly what's going to be commercially available that you can just take off the shelf, and where you go to custom, right? And I think that probably the answer is that a lot more will be actually covered in general purpose tools than we really realize at this point in time.
Yeah, that's true. Can I also just kind of flip that, or look at the other side of that coin and say, these roadmaps and the impact assessments, they're not purely based on technology and technology developments. Like, I'll give you an example. One of the considerations that I ask in these impact assessments is, well, where's your priority area for AI augmentation or automation? A couple of the options are, would you like to focus on your lower skilled, lower order tasks and processes, i.e. closer to the entry level of the organization and the industry? Or do you want to try and automate and augment a lot of the higher order, strategic, analytical, kind of higher ticket end of what you do? Because they have real implications on who you're going to be hiring in the future. If you try and automate more of the entry level jobs, then you're going to need less people.
Yep.
Wages rise a little bit more, because you're becoming like quite a high-powered and specialized organization, versus if you go the other way and you try and map and automate and augment a lot of the kind of higher order thinking and strategic stuff, then you flatten your wages, but you can employ more people, because you're asking them to become generalists that use the tools for the higher order thinking. So like that's kind of one example of the type of things that you should be considering up here. But again, you can't get there unless you've done all of this, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you think about it, the idea at the moment is that there's going to be mass layoffs, that there is, and we are seeing early signs of that. But actually, if you think about it, if you and I are in competition, we've got the same product, and we successfully both AI transform our businesses with AI. Well, if I reduce headcount, you've got the same headcount, but you are, you're further ahead Do you know what I mean? That there's this, the rising tide brings everyone up. So if you are thinking of AI in terms of actually just a bottom line, augmenter, it's probably the wrong way of looking at it, because you're leaving yourself wide open to be heavily disrupted by another competitor who basically just uses it as a head start.
Yeah, exactly. Or your competitor who says, well, we're going to keep the same headcount, but we're going to be radically more productive and efficient and
Yeah.
innovative. It's a crude example because there's nuances to that. Like,
Yep.
well, actually, you've got to consider, does your business have capacity to grow? Can you actually sell more widgets? Or if you operate in a restrained economy where there's no more demand for you to expand into, that's also a consideration. But I think as a commentary, I would much rather be in the business that is betting on humans and using AI to expand capacity, innovation, productivity, workplace satisfaction as well is not insignificant. I'd rather be with them than the ones who say, okay, well, we're going to halve our workforce and just use this as a cost-cutting measure to produce the same amount.
Because I think AI is this is something I'm very curious about, and I think you're an ideal person to answer it, really, because of the type of work that you do. Where do you think expertise and discernment is going? Because, I'm using AI a lot and not in just the sort of marketing tech ways that you might think, but as you say, as a strategic thought partner, and in helping in areas like, I don't know, everything from total addressable market calculations all the way through to helping with brand essence and brand positioning and all these kinds of things. But the reason I'm able to do those things is because I came up through the ranks. I'm an old warhorse. I've been around the traps. I've done all those things. And I understand what the output should look like because I've been through those iterative steps. How do you think that is affecting someone who's coming onto the scene now, who's perhaps a younger person or just getting into their first couple of jobs? Do you think that's changing what they need to know, and how would they sort of find their way to some sort of same level of discernment that we have?
Big question. It's kind of the one of many social experiments that we're just sprinting towards, right? That we're just going to find out in real time, because you're right. Like if I go back to the universities, the business schools that I work with, as an example, you take your average marketing grad, they're not walking into those entry-level roles where they just like write social posts and crunch data and analyze spreadsheets and, for 2 years or 3 years and just basically do their apprenticeship, because all of those tasks are going to be, if not already, being done by AI. And so on the one hand, you've got this, I actually think it's incredible opportunity, because it means that those entry level roles are going to be more fulfilling and you're going to be doing more meaningful work earlier.
Yes.
But as you say, like, you have to have some experience and some wisdom and to have that discernment, that's the right word, of what is good. If I'm straight into my first job and I'm asked to be doing strategic work and like meaningful client relationships and analysis, then how do I know what's good and what's not? I don't think anyone has an answer for those questions. But I saw it recently. Like, I did this presentation at the New Zealand Quantity Surveying Association.
Nice.
And so I did this exercise for them where I built a custom GPT that basically all they had to do was plug in an address, and it would, using deep research, etc., it would go and take them through the whole process of researching what is the likelihood. We basically did a strategic analysis of what needed to be considered to do a resource consent application. Right? And so I did it live in front of the room of like 150 of them. And then at the end, my question was, how long would it take you to do this task? And one of them put their hand up and they said, well, that would take a team of 3 of us, probably 3 or 4 weeks to do it. But the crucial part was, he said, but only if you'd have 20 years experience.
Yeah.
And so that's the question, is a lot of organizations are going to take the opportunity to reduce headcount, especially at the entry level. And if you do that, the other question is, who's going to be your senior employees in 10 years' time if you don't have a junior layer, right?
Yeah. And also, I love what you said about, because whenever I have people occasionally say, "Oh, my son or my daughter wants to get into marketing," I always go, "Okay, well, I hope they like spreadsheets because that's basically what it is. It's not Mad Men, there is that element of it, but certainly in the beginning, it's yeah, get used to spreadsheets. And of course, anything. One of the rules of thumb I'm starting to get with AI now is that if you have a workflow that involves a spreadsheet, then generally you should be thinking pretty hard about whether or not you should be doing it because AI can be involved. But also, I think the aspect of it that's interesting is that you're going to, the guy hit the nail on the head about the 25 years experience and all that sort of stuff. But also AI has this ability with meta prompting where you can actually ask it how to do the thing that you wanted to, in other words, how can I ask you to do something? What are the next steps? That aspect of it, I think, and I think once most people twig onto that, that makes a lot of things capable, even in someone who's relatively green, I imagine.
Well, that was actually for a more complete explanation. That was the demonstration. Was me getting out there and saying, I don't know what you do in your job. I don't even know how to prepare a resource consent application. But using this meta prompt, I can ask AI to create a prompt so that I can go and do that analysis and build this custom GPT. So yeah, like it's like Inception.
Yeah.
Really.
And we've talked a lot about, you and I are AI enthusiasts, obviously. We're very keen, very pro, positive. And we've talked a lot about personal productivity, which in many ways is an easier, has less barrier to entry. Talk me through how you approach some of the risks here, because for an organization, there are some downsides, definitely in the security and in the data sovereignty area, and I guess also the non-deterministic nature of the technology. How do you go about assessing those risks in a way that isn't needlessly punitive?
Are you talking specifically around the
It
data
could be
challenges?
anything. I think, we're talking, if we're starting at layer one and layer two, we're talking about AI education and cultural change, right? And then we get into usage policies. Part of that is got to be, what we want is people to thrive and to kind of, feel the opposite of what a tentative might be. But at the same time, we need them to understand the downsides and what can do that. How do you go about that in this first sort of part of the engagement?
Do you know what I'm going to do? Just because I feel the need to demonstrate that there's more slides than these first two.
Yeah, totally. Let's go for it.
Some of them are actually colourful.
Yeah.
This is actually weirdly, this happened about a month ago. I was just reading my Kindle and I was reading a book by a guy called Tiago Forte, and it actually doesn't have anything to do with AI. And this was written like to the mid-teens, unrelated to AI. But this is what we're talking about here, which says people and institutions and organizations take much longer to change than technology. They don't follow exponential growth curves, but they determine what impact a new technology has on real organizations and people. So that's the rules, the mental models, the policies, habits, self-narratives, paradigms. You can throw into that, I think, anxieties, fears, concerns, whether they're grounded in reality or not. And so this is the other slide I wanted to talk to. This, you will have seen this, I'm sure. This kind of rocked certainly my AI community and world. What is it, 6 weeks ago or so now, when Toby Lutke, who's the CEO of Shopify, he sent out this memo to his whole staff saying reflexive AI usage is now baseline expectation. And so inherent within that is things like AI is going to become part of our hiring policy, part of our review policy. You will be judged on your AI skill sets and whether you're able to keep up, essentially. That's all very well and good to say that. And I've been fascinated. What I wanted to see when he came out with this statement was, well, I wonder if there's going to be any case studies that reveal what's he actually put in place and behind the scenes to enable this. Because it's all very well to say that, but how do you actually enable your staff and your processes? And so that brings it all back to here, which is kind of sits in between these layers, really, is the more literate that your people get and the more skillful they get, you'll address some of those early fears. Like the first questions people have are like, well, if I put things into ChatGPT, can someone else go in and just say, hey, give me all the spreadsheets that Dave Hayward has been looking at in the last month or so? So you address those things that are like not grounded in reality first.
Yeah.
And then you start to address the things like, well, actually, there's really robust privacy mechanisms built into these tools, and they're very good at the individual user and for most organizations. But then there's extra data security practices that are needed for certain businesses that like really deal in highly sensitive. And you address all of those like initial questions, but then the more training and the more literacy and the deeper people get into the technology, other questions start to pop up. And so that's when the cultural change starts to come in, and you're like, well, how do we, as an organization, how are we surfacing the questions that everybody's asking? And then also, what are the forums for discussion? Are we sure that all of our senior leadership team are all speaking to the same things, and they're kind of calming the concerns that are non-grounded and addressing the ones that are actually real? Like there will be deep questions about, well, are you just bringing this technology in to replace me?
Yeah, totally.
So
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about with the cultural change. Firstly, your senior leadership team have to be cognizant of the concerns that are rising, and then they have to be literate and skillful enough themselves to connect with those challenges and to talk to them with their people.
It's interesting. There's some statistic about 80% of marketers use AI, which I think is really low, actually. I think I'd be surprised if almost all marketers are not using it. But 70% of them are worried that it's going to take their job. So there's this kind of a paradigm thing going on that and I think it's because they are clearly understanding the capabilities of it. And if you're not a little bit afraid, then you probably aren't paying attention.
Yep. There's also another interesting stat that you can tag onto that, which is only about 25 or 30% of them are actually telling their management, their direct bosses.
Shadow AI, yep.
Exactly. And so, that is a cultural challenge in and of itself. And because if you go back to your last question, like shadow AI use causes a lot of problems. And one of them is you don't actually hear from people what they are concerned about or worried about with AI, because they're too scared to talk to you about it in any shape or form, because they think either they'll be punished for using it incorrectly, or they'll be punished by just being given more work once they show how much more productive they are. The efficiency gains of these models, like the state-of-the-art models, are increasing at a pace that even leaves Moore's law for dead. And so, of course, efficiency and the economics tied to that have a direct correlation to adoption. How quickly, like it took 50, 70 years for electricity to become kind of a technology for the people.
Yep. Standardized. Yep.
Whereas this is, you're looking, it's rumored that 1 billion people are using ChatGPT these days. It's a significant portion of the world, and a big part of that is because of these efficiency gains, and therefore the ability for the technology to be democratized at ridiculous prices. So I think it's one facet of why this technology is hitting us as a tidal wave, because there's nothing in terms of economics of distributing it. There's no friction.
And of course, they can't make any money out of it just yet. The big LLMs, they're hoovering money out, throwing money out the door, but the market forces are keeping the pricing down. I have, like anyone, like a ridiculous amount of subscriptions that I have to maintain every month. And the easiest one to pay is because the utility I get out of that tool is so incredible, right? And it's like $20 a month or something like that.
Yep. And so if you dovetail that, like that graph that I was just showing is meant to go hand in hand with this one, which is to say, this is some really interesting research. It's only come out in the last kind of 6 months or so, but it's saying that left to itself, how proficient are these tools becoming at like achieving an objective autonomously.
Yep.
And it's basically saying that the length of time that they can work autonomously and accurately, viably for, is doubling every 7 months. So when you talk about like the utility of something like ChatGPT, we haven't even really like started to walk into this area of it actually being able to almost be a universal tool. Agent has just come out, but that's, once agent becomes really good, you're almost not going to need a whole lot of other software around it.
No. Why don't we finish on some rapid fire questions? We'll start with, so, the ChatGPT or Claude, which one? If you had to choose one, which one would it be?
I'd go with ChatGPT, and I'd recommend that as kind of the tool for the masses.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of deep respect for Claude and what that platform does for the right users.
And obviously for a lot of people, they, depending on their workplace, they may actually only be able to use Gemini or Copilot. What are your thoughts on those platforms?
I'm a huge fan of Gemini. I'm a massive fan of Demis Hassabis.
Yep.
I think what Google has done after being caught with their pants down by OpenAI to catch up in such a short amount of time, and now for Gemini to essentially be level pegging with ChatGPT as the best two tools in the world for a consumer AI, I think is incredible. And I expect those two, when you look at things like compute power, access to capital, the best AI minds in the world, and access to data, I expect those two to be the market leaders for the foreseeable future. Copilot, for me, is the big disappointment of the AI era so far. And I've started to conclude that it's not a tech challenge for them because they have access to almost all of those criteria that I just described. I think they're actually they must be hamstrung by their service agreement with OpenAI. I think it's somewhere in there say you have to throttle your models because you can't be a direct competitor to us. That's my only conclusion, because the Copilot is so bad that it has to be that. And I feel for organizations who their leadership is saying you can only use Copilot.
I think there are a lot of IT firms who would argue that Copilot is the safest one because it's single sign-on and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not sure that the trade-off is worth it, by the sounds of things. I haven't used it a great deal, but I was a bit underwhelmed when I used it.
Yeah, look, this is something I'm also hot on as well. I think the best thing that Microsoft has done in the generative AI era is to somehow spread this fallacy that they are more secure and a safer option than the other platforms. It's not actually a true statement, but it is pervasive. And I probably answer this question from prospects and clients half a dozen times a week, but there's no actual truth to that. To that statement. We are designed to work with the New Zealand SME community.
Yep.
Specifically, the way we work is we start working with senior leadership teams, and we have what we call our traction program, which is a 4-week intensive. When we say intensive, it's only 3.5 hours a week, but it's for your whole senior leadership team to do together. It's a mixture of on-demand content and some live digital content. That is, in 4 weeks, you get your senior leadership team all on the same page. Technically, very proficient users of the tools, but strategically, we talk through these and start to get you on track for what a vision there looks like. Out of that, they come out, and we have an online academy of courses and modules and lessons. And that's for the operational layers of organizations. That's how to train your whole staff, your whole workforce on how to use the tools for productivity and efficiency. And then starting next year, 2026, we will have a 12-month cohort for senior leadership teams who actually want step-by-step hand-holding strategic guidance through these 5 strategic building blocks. So that's what we do. That's how we work. It's who we work with.
Mark, who do you reckon it takes a village? So who are the people that you follow and you reckon are worth a follow in terms of AI content and leadership?
Yeah. Should we bounce some off each other?
Yeah.
I always say if I could only follow 2 for the rest of my career, if I had to be restricted to 2, they would be Paul Raitzer from the Marketing AI Institute. So his name is spelled Paul Roetzer, Roetzer, and he has a weekly podcast called The Artificial Intelligence Show, which is, if you were just to listen to that once a week, you get an incredible grounding in the development of AI and how it relates practically to professionals, but also to the world in general, actually. So he's one, and then probably no stranger to a lot of people, Ethan Mollick.
Yeah,
as
I
well.
was going to say Ethan. Yeah.
Yeah, so those would be my two. I also think the guys at Section
Yeah.
as well. You know,
Yeah.
I actually follow probably half a dozen at Section, Ed Ortega being one of them.
Yeah.
So I'd also recommend them. Who would you recommend?
Look, I think you're right. I think, if you look at some of the previous guests we've had here, there's Nadia Ellis from Curiosity, a really great homegrown, New Zealand AI leader.
Mhm.
There's a guy called Mike Bailey who's doing, he's doing a thing called the AI Corner, which is another podcast and is really doing great stuff for the AI awareness in New Zealand itself. And then in terms of overseas, thinkers and things like that, I think you could do a lot worse than follow the Section people, because they really, amongst being technically proficient, they're educators, so they're really good communicators, which I find probably of them that we haven't mentioned is there's a woman called Ashley Gross who's really fantastic and has that rare gift of being able to take these quite complex ideas and talk about them simply, which is something that all of the people that you've mentioned are really good at.
Yep. And then just to add also some diversity into the mix, although not just for that reason, but Ali K. Miller, who is the number one followed AI commentator on LinkedIn, and for a very good reason. She's exceptional, and she's like very, very practical, the effect that AI is having on organizations and individuals. And then there's also, you have to hunt a little further for it, but for those of you interested in the marketing space especially, Liz Adams as well.
Cool.
Similarly, I love the pragmatic, practical people, and she dominates that space too for the crossover of marketing and AI.
There you have it, folks. We for those of you watching on video, Mark's put his contact details up there. It is mark@10pasttomorrow.com if you want to get in touch with him. Look out for us on LinkedIn. And I'll post all the stuff that you need to know in the show notes, so you don't need to worry about that too much if you do that. But I'd just like to finish by thanking Mark for being an amazing guest, and I think I could easily have talked to you for many hours, so we won't inflict that on the listeners this time, but I hope you'll come back. Hopefully you'll come back and we can chat some more sometime.
I'd love to, mate. I have a feeling AI is not a passing fad, so as long as the technology's here, I will be here as well. I love it, and thank you for having me on here.